information session so you can start to get your heads around PLD phonics as well. It's actually quite exciting that we're starting a proper structured synthetic phonics program in school. And that was certainly something I was quite excited about in terms of when I was came for my interview last year, as we know that's where all the research lies, as being the best way to teach our kids how to read. So welcome to the session tonight. So I'm going to start by giving you a bit of an overview of some of the, I guess, the background stuff, like looking at what phonics actually is and what oral language means. And then Wendy will jump in and she'll sort of fill in more from specifically about the PLD program itself, what it looks like in the classroom, and also ways that you can support that at home to help your learners. Just so you know, and also for the people on Teams, that the session is being recorded, just so that people who can't come along tonight can view it as well. So, and people on Teams, if you have any questions, just pop them into the chat box. Wendy's manning the chat, and yeah, we'll do our best. We'll see how we go. So the PLD phonics program was developed by a speech pathologist, Diana Rigg. So it's certainly not just grounded in education, research and theory, but it's grounded in speech pathology. And I guess it is the combination of both that make it such a strong program. It's also got the elements of some of, I guess, that motor and movement, which is also very important as well, that we'll talk about as we go through. So yes, and she's got that in there. So it's looking at oral language plus the motor and movement skills and how they all fit together to help us to learn to read. As adults, we all read by sight. We've learnt to read. So what happens is you eventually, as you're learning to read and you go through that process, every word becomes like a sight word because we use our visual memory to read with in the end. And that's what we want to get our kids to, that fluid stage of reading. And we do that by looking at a synthetic systematic phonics program. Synthetic just means that it's about synthesising sounds and bringing them together. And systematic just means that it's a very structured step-by-step approach that builds up on previous sort of learning. So yes, and it's just saying there to be truly literate, as well as it's a lot more than just reading. You have to be able to speak, which is your oral language. You have to be able to listen and interpret and comprehend language, as well as applying it to print. So it's about that oral language is super, super critical in being able to develop fluent readers. And that's where our big focus is, particularly in those early years, but still has a very big impact as we go through the older years as well. Yep. I love this diagram. It's used a lot out there in the research field, and it's talking about how skilled reading is like that rope, okay, where each of the strands is that different skill or that different element that comes together to make a skilled reader. You can't see it as clearly up there, but all the red strands, they're actually all based on language. So they're about the language comprehension. And from a very little age, when your little ones start, you know, the babble, the baby talk, and they start understanding that you're using words to communicate, that's when that oral language starts very young. And that's when we know that power of conversation is so important in exposing our little ones, not just to vocabulary and words, but how the words go together to create meaning. So all of these, the red strands are things like background knowledge, vocabulary, so that ability to have a wide range of vocabulary, understand that vocab can mean different things in different contexts. So you know that you could have a particular word that has several different meanings depending on what sort of situation that it's being used in. Then we have our language structures, our verbal reasoning. So like we said, that ability to interpret and understand the language that we're hearing and the language that we're using. And then we have the literacy knowledge itself. So that's those early concepts of print. And we've just gone through with all our little preppies in particular and some of our little year ones looking at their understanding of the concepts of print. Do they understand that words go from left to right? Do they understand what an initial sound is in a word and where might I find that on the page? So I was looking at those really early concepts of written text. The blue strands are actually all the word recognition. So that's when we really start to build in those skills of knowing what sounds are and how they actually map to letters. So I know the sound is a, and if I want to show that with a letter, it actually has that letter form that goes with it. So it's building up that understanding of sounds represented in print. and the different way that sounds and letters can go together in different spelling patterns, and it gets a lot more complicated. That's when the vowels have a lot more meaning, and if you have a young one that has difficulty with reading and spelling, the vowels are often the issue, especially as they get into the older grades, because there's so many different ways we can combine vowels to make different sounds. And then down the bottom we've got decoding. So decoding is your ability to read a word, to unpack the sounds and read the word. If you talk about encoding, it's about how we put the sounds together to spell a word. So we talk about decoding is the reading, encoding is how we put the sounds together to spell. And then I put this little thing in here because memory is huge. So if you're a young one who has particularly working memory challenges, so that's that ability to take in information, hold on to it, do something with it, and spit it out. So when you're reading or you're writing, at a writing level, for example, you've got to remember the sentence you're writing. You've got to remember how to spell each of those words, how to form the letters that spell each of those words. So there's a lot going on from a memory point of view. So if you have challenges with your working memory, it can take a little bit longer for you to learn that code of reading. So yeah, memory is super important as well. So you might see this diagram. This is actually from the PLD program, and it's putting those same elements together. So the first one is sort of looking at the language bound literacy skills. So like we said, that's the spoken language, that ability to understand the different types of vocabulary and the way that it means different things in different situations. But it's even things like knowing the structure of a spoken sentence. So we might find that some little ones, they don't quite have that grammatical structure of those spoken sentences. So if you don't have that capacity in your oral language, it's really difficult for you to be able to show that in a written language. So the oral language always comes first, and then the written language follows. We talk a lot about, actually we'll go on to this in phonemic, we'll pop into the next one. So when we're looking at that early ability with sounds, that's what we call phonemic awareness. So phoneme means the very smallest unit of a word, so it's a sound pretty much. So phonemic awareness is talking about the young one's awareness of sounds and how they work together. And we use, and Wendy will show this later on with her sort of classroom references, but these are the type of questions that we might ask the kids for us to get an understanding of their understanding of sounds. So can they isolate sounds? If we say, what's the first sound in cat? Are they able to actually understand, well, there's a k? So that isolating sound is one of those critical first steps when we're looking at that phonemic awareness. And then we move on to what's the last sound in cat. So then they have to know, well, that's a t. And then the trickiest one is actually the middle sound. So what's the middle sound in cat? Well, that's an a. We do things like blending and segmenting sounds. So blending sounds is that ability that if you've got a k, an a and a t, I can push that together and that says cat. If you've got working memory challenges, you've got to hold on to 3 separate sounds, the k, the a and the t, and then be able to blend them together to get cat. So this can be quite tricky for some of the little ones, or the older kids that do have those memory difficulties. So then we start with sounds that are easier to blend. So we might start with what we call continuous sounds that we can hold for a long time, like an S, for example, sat, and we can blend that more smoothly. So so that blending is really important in teaching a child to read. So when we're reading in the context of our little readers, we want them to blend the sounds together smoothly. We don't want to have that staccato sort of act. We want it to be really quite fluid and smooth. And then when they're spelling, we want them to do the opposite. So we think, can they segment sounds? So if the word is cat, I want you to say each of the sounds, k, at. So that's that oral, that spoken language is important before the written. And then there's a few other ones in there, like deleting sounds are always interesting. If we've got the word cat, what word do we get when we take away the k? Okay, we want them to be able to say at. Okay, or I want you to say the word cat. Now instead of the k, I want you to put a s, and you have to be able to say sat. So there's lots of this manipulating sounds and playing with sounds to build up their understanding of sounds before we get on to the letters. And with our early foundation kids, that's what we're working at in term 1. It's not actually going into written text, it's about building up their sound knowledge. Yep. Then when they've got that sound knowledge, then we want them to map it to letters. Okay, and this is what we call orthographic mapping, all these big words. So orthographic mapping is the process we use to permanently store that into long-term memory. So if you can see this picture, this chart here is really, I'll sort of explain what it is because it's really quite handy to get that understanding of each stage. So in the first instance, the part of the brain that lights up is understanding what a cat is. Okay, so as a little kid, I can see a cat, I label that cat. Okay, so that's a part of the brain that's doing that and getting that understanding. Then what we want them to build up is, well, I know in the word cat, I can hear 3 sounds, the k, the a, and the t. So that's that phonemic awareness, that phonological understanding. And then what we want them to do is actually map it to the letter, map it to the symbol. And that's when, well, I know the k is a C, the a is an A, and the t is a T. So that's how I write cat, and that's how I read cat. So that's the different stages we go through. So it's always starting with the sounds and then transitioning into the letter representation. Yep. And this is, once again, if you see the symbol, that's straight from the PLD program. And that's a lot of what's happening within the program we're doing. Sorry. So we've got our literacy component, which is where you look at the spelling, the decoding, the mapping, so sounds to letters and what that looks like and how it fits together. You've got the oral language, and that's when we're looking at the act of speaking and listening. So we've got the vocabulary, which is word knowledge, which is really, really critical. And that's something that you can be working on at home all the time, is building up your child's understanding of words and what they mean. And the richer vocab that you can use in your conversations with your child, the richer vocab that they will start to use in their own language. So don't ever shy away from using really strong, like rich vocab words, because that's what we want to do. We want to expose them to as rich a vocabulary as we can. We've got sentence structure, so grammar, knowing that is I sat on the chair, not I chair sat on. Okay, so it's building up that understanding, and this is still at a spoken language, oral language. Their language understanding, so that's that comprehension. So if you give your child an instruction or you're having a conversation with your child, are they comprehending and understanding what you're saying? Because that's really critical in literacy development as well. And then the structured thinking, so that's that higher level sort of comprehension when you're wanting them to structure, organise ideas, make decisions, sort of understand some of those hidden messages in text, and that's that making inferences when you don't know directly what it's saying, but you've got to use a bit of your own knowledge to make an inference. That's some of that higher level oral language skills. And if your child's not able to comprehend at a spoken level, it's really difficult for them to do it in a written text. And it says here, while poor oral language skills do not prevent children from reading, the long-term impact is concerning. And that's what we often see as teachers, that kids move through the early years and they seem to be quite okay and quite on track. And then they get to year 3 and 4 and their literacy falls apart. Because all of a sudden it's not at that really basic, easy level. It's when all the irregular spellings come into play and the vowels have a lot more impact, and that's when things start to fall apart for them. So often we might see that as well. And then the last thing is the movement and motor. So the more automatic we can make things like letter formation, the less strain it is on the memory when kids are writing. If you're a little one that has fine motor or handwriting difficulties and you're trying to write a piece of text, remember what the sentence, remember how to spell the words, and then I've got to remember how to form the letters, and I've actually got to do it, and holding on that pencil is a bit tricky. That's huge. That's a lot of demand on the brain, and so it's no wonder that they become exhausted. So the more fluid that we can build that letter formation, the better it is. And even though the little preppers at the moment are not writing, they're definitely doing letter formations in the air to build up that understanding and get that muscle memory sort of activated. That's that. And then I think I'm going to throw to you, Miss Wendy.
So with the PLD program, we decided to introduce it. So it is a synthetic phonics program. We decided to introduce it because even though our early years data was travelling along okay. We were getting, 60, 70% of our kids, up to about 80% of our kids, reaching the BCE sort of benchmark of where they wanted to be at the end of prep. There was still a lot of children who weren't reaching that. And by the end of year 2, they were getting there. And we still had that small percentage of children who weren't quite there. But it was taking them 2 to 3 years to get there. And so whilst the approach we were taking was pulling in lots of children, we still had some children who it wasn't working for that particular approach. And we've always taught phonics. Phonics is part of the Australian curriculum, and it's actually part of the curriculum from prep to year 6. And I suppose it's the approach that we have taken to teaching phonics, and that's across the system as well, where they talk about it's a whole language approach, where there is the teaching of phonics, and then we also have the whole language part of it where we're looking at it within a context. Back in the 70s, 60s and 70s, where it was very structured teaching of phonics, almost to the rote kind of degree. So it did bring a lot of children who became literate, but there are also some children who didn't cope with that really structured rote, or it wasn't repetitive enough for them. And then we went to the other side to that beautiful whole language immersion, and they will just absorb it all in the 80s, where that's where they said, children it happened through osmosis. So we went from one extreme to the other within education. And then recently it's gone back to sort of a middle grounding, but I think we've decided it needs to go not all the way back to rote learning, but a little bit more into the structured phonics teaching in the early years, because that's where the children need to have it so that they can build on it through as they move through primary school. And it's not that we've never taught phonics, we do teach phonics. This is just a bit more of a structured approach to it. And this, we decided to talk to the speech pathologist who comes in and works with children. We asked her advice on different programs. This program came up, it's a Western Australian program. So it's relevant for our children as well. As Tracy said, it was developed by Diana Riggs, who was a teacher and then studied speech pathology. She had her own consultancy program, like a clinic over in Western Australia that they worked with children. She worked with OTs and educators within that as well. So they came together to design this program. This program looks at, so this is the triangle of support, and what happens is the tier 1 support is the quality teaching in the classroom. That's the first quality teaching where we target the children. The second tier is where then you might pull out groups of children who aren't quite grasping that concept, and that's where you target teach to those children who maybe haven't got it at that first tier of teaching, that first quality teaching level. So these children might need some extra support and small group work with the teacher, or with a specialist who's coming into the room, with a school officer, with Tracy, who might work in small groups within the classroom. The PLD program aims to target these two, and then tier 3, and some of the, I suppose some of the speech pathologists look at tier 4, they break it up into 4 parts, but ultimately the tier 3 are for that really small percentage of children who do have literacy delays, who need specialised support. So they might need regular speech therapy sessions, regular OT sessions with an actual specialist in that field. So with this program, it's endorsed by Ausspelled. So for those people who aren't aware of Ausspelled, Tracy. Ausspelled,
yes.
sorry.
So Ausspelled, so we have Spelled Queensland, but Ausspelled is the national body, and that's an organisation that, it's a not-for-profit, but it specifically supports young people with dyslexia, was the old term. There's lots of different terms now, but basically dyslexia. So, so we have Spelled Queensland, which is based over at Wollongabba, and they only will endorse programs that have the research and the evidence behind them. So anything that sort of has that Ausspelled logo on it, or that that they've accredited it, you can be sort of, feel confident that it is a really good research-based program to use.
And that's that it is a research-based program. So Ausbelt do actually endorse this one, particularly as it's one that can be used within classrooms. A lot of the programs that speech pathologists use are very, very structured, even in the responses that the speech pathologist gives back to the children when they're working with them. It's quite structured and spelled out as to how they respond to them. This program works in that the teachers, it's all out for the teachers, but they can implement it in their classroom and respond to the children appropriate to how they know the children as well. Ausbelt would say, because it's a program that looks at Tier 1 and Tier 2 support, it's a great one to be using in the classroom.
Sorry, Wendy, did this have it's just saying 5 minutes left in your scheduled meeting time? Should I be concerned?
I don't know.
Okay.
It shouldn't.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
And as I was saying, it links to the Australian curriculum. So this here is the Australian curriculum from prep to year 6. This is the phonics part of it, and it just shows you these are the content descriptors that we cover in the Australian curriculum. And over here at the side is the programs that PLD have and where they actually link to that part of the curriculum. So it is linked with the Australian curriculum. So we're not teaching anything we shouldn't be teaching. I just wanted to also direct you to her she's got a website, but also to her YouTube channel. If you subscribe to the PLD YouTube channel, she has great little videos that are 5 minutes, 7 minutes long, broken up, and this is the link that will take you to the parent playlist as well. And she talks about how you can support the oral language at home. One that's really, one that is a really good one to look at on her YouTube channel is how to pronounce the sounds. It's a 5-minute little video, and you know, I've taught prep to 6, I know how to pronounce the sounds, I've taught phonics. I learned something new because I was pronouncing W wrong and I was pronouncing Y wrong. So when we go through it, it's not W, it's W, and it's not Y, it's Y. Am I pronouncing properly?
Yeah, because when you if you accentuate the at the end, they actually call that the schwa, which is like a lazy sound. So if we say duh, what happens is sometimes the reader can perceive that as 2 sounds, and so when they're trying to spell, I don't know, like I always think of p, for example. If you're trying to spell the word play, they start to think of p as in p, not P-U-L-A-Y. So it starts to impact on spelling. So we want to be careful that we keep the sound as concise as possible.
So I thought that was really
Which is the way that speech pathologists teach the sounds.
Yes.
Yeah. Next.
Yes, please. And then this one was just a slide to show you actually the program from, it actually starts from what they call early years. So that's like the kindergarten. For us, it's kindy, but we've actually taken it from foundation and through to, it does go through to year 6, but this is actually what they cover. So the purple section is what they cover in prep. And the way she's broken it up, as Tracy was saying, first term is basically looking at phonemic awareness. So getting all of those, the oral language and the sounds, teaching the sounds. Sorry about that beeping. Before they actually even move into texts. So some prep students, if you have prep students, some prep students might be taking some home readers home because they're at that level of reading. Most of them through the program are not taking a home reader home because as part of this program, it's teaching them the sounds, it's getting that oral language and teaching them how to decode and encode words. And the program is then aimed at sending home the home readers from term 2 because they would have covered that group of sounds so that then they can then go and practice the decoding when they're reading the text. So it's all about, and she talks about it's repetitive practice. If they're doing repeated practice all the time, that's where the fluency comes in, and all they're focusing on is breaking down and sounding out those words. That's all we want them to do cognitively. that's enough of the load for them, and it will be quite stilted to start because they'll be sounding out every single word. As they progress through and become familiar with it as well, we want that fluency to increase. So it'll be more fluent reading with that. But this is just an overview of the sort of the teaching sequence that happens.
Do you want to read into decodables now, or have you got that in up there?
I think I've got that later on.
It's in here.
Go and look at that. So the classroom program, now it's all new for our teachers as well, and because we just purchased the whole program, there's lots of books involved and lots of teacher resources. So that, we're not putting a lot of pressure on them to get it all happening and everything incorporated all at once. They're working through it themselves as well and working through it with the students. We've had a few meetings with the teachers just to talk about what's happening in their room, sharing what they're doing, where they're at with it as well. But the teachers are already sharing back that they're starting to see even so for example with the year twos who they've missed the first 2 years of this program. Even the year 2 teachers are saying they've done it for 3 or 4 weeks now, and they're starting to see it in their writing. And so it's, even just that small amount of work that they've been doing in class is starting to show. So in the classroom, it will be explicit teaching of the phonemic awareness, so your onset of rhyme syllables sounding out. Explicit teaching of phonics, so the letter sound correspondence. It'll be explicit teaching of the letter formation and handwriting of sounds. And some of these, this information is in that very thick booklet I've done for you, that have got how to form the letters, pencil grip, all that sort of stuff. Decodable readers will be sent home to support the repeated practice of decoding the sounds to begin the student's reading journey. And that will happen, the whole idea of this program is it works on about an 18-month for the actual, developing those reading skills. So they say if they start in prep on the decodable readers, then generally the children should be starting to drop off using decodable readers by the end of year 1 and definitely into year 2. You will still have a small percentage of those children who need that extra support, and we will always have that in our classroom, that those children still need that continued practice, and they will still take their own decodable readers to help with that fluency and decoding words as well, and to help to transfer it to their writing.
And so just with the decodable readers, what that means is that it's readers that have the text in, that the kids have learnt those sounds and they know how to sound them and blend them together. You might be familiar with the general readers that come home with the kids just memorise every sentence on every page. And so they're actually just reading with memory. They're not actually reading. So decodable readers are meant that the majority of sounds in there are the ones that the children are being exposed to at school, so that they can actually practice the skills that they're learning.
So I've got some there that you can have a look at after. And so generally when they take, this is an example of prep ones that will go home later on. But it's also in here that will give you an idea as well of some ideas for what to talk to them about before reading, while they're reading, give you a clue as to what, to chat to them about after reading, but it tells you what phonics is the focus in that decodable reader as well. So when they're so Bobby gets stuck, she doesn't call them sight words in this program because that's a false impression that you have to learn them by memory. She refers to them as high frequency words. Some of them are regular high frequency words. So they're words that appear a lot in the text and you can decode them, you can sound them out. There are the irregular high frequency words. So they are the words that you come across like was and so forth that you can't sound out like that. But she does talk about, getting them to sound out. If they're sounding out was, they could sound out was. Well, actually, I know that's was. So it's making that link as well. So this one, like the sun is high and bright, Bobby sings his buzzing song. So they're all words that are in there that they can decode because they would have come across all of those sounds and explicitly been taught those sounds before they have actually taken that text. Whereas previously, if you had Older children, you would know what they refer to as the whole language home readers, where they do read from memory, or it's a repeated sentence and the very last page changes a little bit, and they can use the picture cues to help them. That is part of reading, but the initial part is the decoding part of it. So we need children to have those skills, and because as they get, Tracy says, they get to year 3, texts are harder, and they can't rely on purely using the pictures to help them decode words or from memory, because they're coming across more difficult. Well, if you go up to the 3 dots, if you go up to the little people. Yep, show participants, you'll be able to see who you can use. There will also be games and activities in the room that will reinforce that phonic concept. There'll be dictation as well. So with the dictation, it's a new thing for the children. They're not used to it. It teaches their auditory memory, like processing as well, but also listening skills. But the dictation is actually the texts that are in the book are ones that are great quality texts where the sentences are really well structured, but it's incorporating some of those, what we call tier 2 and tier 3 words. So it's actually increasing their vocab and giving them some really rich vocab, but it's transferring that phonics knowledge that they're focusing on into their writing as well, and practicing. So where they get a list of words to learn to spell and focus on, sometimes they just, in the past they've learned them for the test on the Friday and then they never use them again. So this is actually, they do have spelling tests, but or spelling words, but it's encouraging them to use them then, transfer them into their writing. And it's based around the what they are up to with their phonics. And I'll show you a little video a little bit later of how that looks in the classroom. Yes, please. So here's a little video of some preps doing one of the phonics lessons. And this is an example I'll go through of how we teach them. We talk about the phonemes, the sounds in the words. So when we, with the preps at the moment, they are going through learning the sounds. So they have a little flip book that the teacher does with them. And in this program, it's not doing like another 20-minute lesson. It's actually doing a 5-minute lesson, but doing it 3 or 4 times during the day. So, they're introduced to the sounds, and they might have a flip book with the letter S on it, and it will be, what's this sound? What's this sound? What's this sound? So rather than saying, what's this letter? It's what's this sound? Because when they go to read and when they go to write, yes, they need to know, identify that that's a T, but to read it, they actually have to know the sound. So that's the priority there. So we're teaching them, what's this sound? What's this sound? What's this sound? The kids are loving it. And this is a little video, plus there are little actions to help remind them of what the sound is. There's also a visual image as well.
I can't make it full screen. It's on bottom right. Yeah.
So if you get an idea of,
They're breaking it up like the
into the parts, so they can actually they'll be able to say
I'm still buffering.
because they're doing the same one. So they actually understanding that there are 3 sounds in that word. So by doing some physical things or the actions or counting it out on their fingers,
drum beats.
It has 3 sounds to it. So when we're teaching them as they move further up into the other grades as well. So if we look at the word frog, we might ask them how many sounds in frog. So it's not how many letters, it's how many sounds. So when we sound it out, it's there are 4 sounds. And that's then what they write down.
We've got a hand up too.
So they think of, even though that one's got 4 letters, it has 4 sounds in it. And that's what we want them to listen for. So and another example is 3. got 5 letters in it, but we want them to know how many sounds are in that word. So it's E. There are 3 sounds. And as they've learned then through the phonics that the TH says, those 2 letters say, the double E says E. So they're learning those, the sounds, but then they know, okay, when I write 3, I can hear 3 sounds in it.
Rachel, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. I just wanted to know what's the actions going, because my son's come home with different actions for different letters.
Yes.
Good question. So, and when you watch Diana Reed's little videos, because she is a speech pathologist too, she really accentuates.
Yeah.
And that's what she says as well when you're doing the sounds. So, like, you know, if she says, you know, what's this sound, and it's an N for nose, she'll go and really like show you with the mouth, or you know,
the apple's a good one.
The apple. So it's biting an apple. So but because what the kids need to see is the shape their mouth makes when they do it, and like, you know, for egg, and I think the egg one is she cracks. I think that actually she cracks the egg. So when she says, you know, what's this sound? And her mouth is really open and accentuated, because the children need to see that that's a visual representation of it, and that's what their mouth should be making too. Hope that answers your question. So they're all different, I think.
Do they?
But
have
that one
access?
is per act. So that was like, why were they touching their head and their shoulders when I thought per was push and was apple?
That could also be where they're distinguishing between how many sounds there are. So they may not necessarily be doing the action for that letter, because the action is there to teach them, but ultimately we want to phase that part of it out. That's just a prompt. And same with the visual as well. So it's there to help them, and eventually, like, so they go through the card. One side of the card has the letter, and it has the action, and it has a picture to give the children a visual prompt, and it has the mouth shape as well. But then when they flip it over the other side of the card, it's just the letter. So we want them not to rely on the visual images as well, and the actions.
And also, it's depending on what the task they're doing. So in that particular task, they're focusing on splitting the sounds up so they can count the sounds. So each session that they do, it actually has 2 or 3 minutes of each skill. So the first part of the skill might be the letter sound correspondence, which is where they have the action for the individual sound. But then another part of the skill is how to segment and how to break words into sounds, which is what they're doing with that one, the per act. So depending what the particular skill is that they're doing. So they, within that 10-minute or 5 to 10 minute session, there's 4 different skills they focus on. So there's the letter sound, the segmenting, and the blending, so pushing sounds together, and then they have the letter formation where they're sort of air writing as well.
So yeah, so that part of the lesson might have been because they have learnt the sound, they've learnt the act sound, and they've learnt the t sound. So what they're doing then is putting those all together. So it could be act, it could be app, so tap. So they're practicing, as Tracy said, putting them all together. Oh, so this one's me. So this is showing how we are teaching the spelling in the upper school. So we've done from year 2 to year 6, they have done one of the spelling tests. So it's like a pre-test, but it's a test of the sounds that they know. And so we've given them a list of words. They keep going as far as they can go. And from there, we can actually then group them into where we need to target there. What phonics they are missing, and generally within a class you might have 3 different groups that you're targeting, and this is, so in our class up in year 4 we've got 4 different groups currently, and so this was actually yesterday's lesson. They get a new list on a Monday. They focus on those phonic concepts for their group. So from what we saw in the test, that gives us an idea of where their gaps are, and we give them words to work on during the week. We don't test them at the end of the week on those words because they're not memorising them for a test. What we might do, you know, every 2 or 3 weeks, we might take a couple of those words from previous lists and ask them to spell them. Or we might actually give them totally different words but have that phonic concept in it to see if they are transferring it across and understanding it. So this is where I've got the 4 different lists here, and this is actually where we're breaking it up into how many sounds do we hear in the word, and the way they're recording it, they'll have their own sheet with their list that is stuck on it, and their sheet divided up into boxes. And I told the kids, you know, they're Elkonian boxes or sound boxes, and we put 1 sound in each box to tell us how many sounds are in the word. So this is then just how a spelling lesson runs.
It's going to buffer.
We won't watch the whole 6 minutes.
In this case, I have a box. I might have X's on my sheet, but this time I haven't. So let's do it again. How many sounds? 4.
Frustrating.
Back and see.
Yeah, start again.
Yeah, because it's buffered down.
In this case, I have boxes. I might have X's on my sheet, but this time I haven't. So let's do it again. How many sounds? 4. How many sound boxes did I fill? 4. And I've used 2 colours for each sound. Right, if you are group number 3, we're doing the IGH sound, saying I. Let's do your first word. I. How many sounds? 2. Show me again. I. How many sounds? 2. So let's try it again. Sound boxes.
Buffer a little bit. And what I think while that's buffering, with the older kids too, it's building up that understanding that for some of them it is about going back and filling in gaps. So they may feel like, why are we going back doing these sounds that are for the younger kids? It's about, well, actually in your sort of wall, we think of reading as a brick wall, a nice stable foundation. There's some wobbly bricks, and we need to fill those gaps back up to be able to build your knowledge up to where it should be. And it's developing that understanding that, yes, if you were learning this sound and you were still in prep, it might take you a little while to get a hold of it. But now you're much older and you actually won't spend long learning these phonics sounds that you've missed, because they're just basically filling up gaps that you've missed out on. So the idea is that, like, the older kids may not spend a long time in that lower stage. It's just let's fill those gaps first and then let's keep moving forward. Otherwise, they're forever band-aiding and they're never really progressing in terms of their phonics knowledge. So that's the aim of that program with the upper years as well. Okay.
And as I'm writing it, I'm saying the sound. I. So I don't use 2 sound boxes. I. If our last group, group 4, they are doing EARC, and their first word is let's sound it out. Use your fingers. And I want to see, this isn't being a baby using fingers, this is what adults do too. When they're writing tricky words, they will break them up into parts so that they can hear the sounds. So, let's go. How many sounds do we hear? 2. Let's do it again.
We can stop
We
there.
can stop it.
Stop watching me now. So we've done that to the whole class. So the whole class will hear all the words that each of the groups are learning, and they will see them. So that will help the group, say group 1, they will know what's coming ahead. And group 2, 3 or 4, it's great revision. They can hear what they already know, and it's that repetitive understanding as well. With it, then from there, they take that, they work on that themselves, but plus in our literacy rotations, they will be practicing some activities and things each day based around those words.
So when they're working on their own task, it's at their stage. So although they're all as a group there, hearing each of the groups, when they actually do their actual literacy task, it's just their own stage that they're working at.
So it's the same task, but they're doing
Yeah.
it just their own list of words, yeah. Let's just move right on. So this is what it might look like at home for you. You might see the decodable readers come home. You might also see, particularly in the upper school too, but even in some of the lower classes as well, you might see some of these, which are the phonic dictation passages. And the way, as you can see, the bigger ones up on the school, and this one is one of the upper school ones as well. They will go home according to the phonics stage that the children are up to as well. That's something that can go home as great repeated reading, and that's one thing that she encourages in this program is that, you know, they read it every day so that they are familiar with it, their fluency is increasing, and that they can identify those sounds in the words as well. So it's all about practicing. So this is the dictation that they would have. One of the things is they read it every day, so they're familiar with it. Another task here, which they do it at school, this empty box here, is then they have to illustrate as much of the text as they can. So as they've read the passage, then they have to draw and label as much as what they can out of comprehending the text. Then another task will be they do some proofreading and editing of the text. So it's rewritten for them, but they might have to find the spelling mistakes which are based around the phonics that they are up to. It could be capital letters and full stops. And it will say, there are up to 16 errors in this passage. Can you find them all? And they just go through and circle them. And then one of the last activities is, one of them is also writing, using some of the words and putting them in their own writing. And the last one is a dictation lesson or an activity where it's dictated to them, and she even goes into, so like a man was in a rush, and it's repeated and repeated and repeated, even telling them the punctuation to use. So the children start to increase their skills and abilities as to even writing it down as well.
With the repeated reading as well, it can be quite powerful to record, for your child to record themselves, because if they're reading the same passage each day and then listening to themselves reading and looking for, well, is there a difference in the fluency and the smoothness of your reading? Because when you've got that real sort of staccato, boom, 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 that's not the reading that we're looking for. We're looking for that really smooth, at ease reading, because that's what helps our comprehension. So the actually recording them reading can be really powerful for them to be able to listen to themselves and then see what changes happen over the week if they are starting to read more fluently. Timed reading can be good for that as well. So reading exactly the same group of sentences but timing them. And we don't want to be, racing through, but we want to get that nice fluid rhythm happening. And so timing can be something that for them to monitor as well, so they can see progress. And you modelling fluent reading so they can see what a modelled sort of reading sounds like is really helpful.
And that's what this part at the top of the dictation is. It's like each of the days, and it's 10 to 1, and they read it, and then what the time was that they had. And it, as we said, it's not a race to be, the fastest, but they should see over time that they are, at the end of the week, they're actually reading it more fluently because they're more familiar with it too. Or you might actually also get, rather than particularly in the early years, it's not sending home spelling lists to learn. It's actually sending home phonics games. So it might be that your child is doing consonant vowel consonant words. And
some of the PNF
I think it might be the PNF one. Yeah, we're almost finished. So you might get a bingo game that gets sent home that you can just cut up, and that's what you play and practice during the week with your child, because they're then practicing decoding consonant vowel consonant words. Or you might get a game board where they're practicing that particular phonics concept that they are up to. So they're the types of things you might see at home. So this is her Facebook page. The PLD Facebook page is a great one to go to. It's got some great information as well. As I said, the YouTube channel has great videos, and even some of those videos are ones that of how the teachers would teach it in class. She demonstrates all of that as well. And the website here, which is where most of that stuff came from as well, it's got things in there that pretty much look more to there. So and in the booklet, I didn't know what to leave out of it. So as a parent, I thought, what would I want included? So there's just some helpful little things. Prep parents who are here, you may have seen some of these from the, your information night as well. This one here is about dominance, like the right hand, left hand dominance, and how to distinguish that with your child. There's also cutting skills and how to hold scissors and cutting and so forth. There's teaching like the development of the appropriate pencil grip. So the ages of how they hold their pencil and when they should be starting to change that pencil grip. The correct pencil grip, and there is one there for right-handers, and then there's the correct pencil grip for lefties. And then also the alphabet letter formation, just to give you an idea. So this is actually what the teachers would be doing in class with them. How you can, tips for helping a left-handed writer, correct posture when they're writing as well, even at home. And then just little milestone things. So things are like, now that I'm 4, I should be able to do these things generally. Now I'm 5. So there's a few different ones in there just for a reference for you as well. Speech sound development, that is a developmental thing. So that whole, you know, the TH sound, that's a developmental process. So it's when they're about, I think it's around about the age of 7 or so.
Yeah.
It's that's when they should, you know, you'll see them starting to do it. So when they're, you know, 4 and 5, they won't have that developmentally. Definitely correct them and pick them up on it. Yeah, so there's just a whole lot of developmental time frames there to give you an idea of what would be expected in an ideal normal, whatever normal is, person. There's also some recommended picture books for different ages. And there's actually some that recommend for older students too. Picture books aren't just for little kids, but you know, your 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12-year-olds. There's a list because some of those concepts are quite interesting and tricky concepts. And then I've just put in there the phonics and things that are covered from foundation through to year 2 in particular.
And certainly still reading those rich books at home as well. Don't think that every book has to be a decodable book. That's to practice the skill of reading. But certainly if you're reading with your young person at home, the richer book you can read with them, the better. Yeah.
Because that's where they get their language from. That's where they get that vocab from. So.
And I think you're going to send a link or something for people at home for those book lists. Is that what
yes, I will send a link so that they can have a soft copy. They'll get the coloured version. Get the black and white, sorry. But that's it because I'm conscious of the PNF starting at 7 o'clock. So if there are any questions that you had about it, if you wanted to have a quick look at some of the books here, but thank you very much for coming out. If you do have questions, you can send them to either Tracy or myself and we will try to answer them for you. So thank you to our parents at home who signed in and logged in and listened. The video will be made available, so you know, you can rewatch it many, many times if you wish to. That's it.
So that's it.
So thank you.
Okay, so thank you everyone online. I'm about to disconnect you.
I think they have to read first.
Unless I anything, I can end the meeting.
Oh, they could stay on. Yeah, they could stay for.
Oh, is it the same link for the PNF? Oh, well, you're welcome to stay for the PNF.
Oh, yes, most definitely welcome to stay for the PNF. Mr. Hull, you're most welcome to stay. So thank you very much for coming. And let's just say, oh, PNF, what's the needs? Hi.
So you're going to stop presenting or not?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think Dan's in charge of it. Yeah, I wasn't sure that one was going to copy it. Oh, okay.
And the presentation for everyone.
Yeah.
Switch presenters, select cancel, so the next person can take control.
Sure. Let's do that and let's just turn the camera off.
Cancel.